Okay, so here we are on the island of TjoÜrn, and we are at the Pilane Sculpture Park. And here's our first sculpture, and it's called Diana. And the reason it's called Diana is because it comes from a sloop named Diana that carried military officials from one, actually seamen from one place to another. And there's a propeller, brass propeller, on the top of this sculpture. And the wood, of course, comes from the boat. And as we look around, we see more rocks. This is West Sweden. This is an island off the coast, 1 hour north of Gothenburg. And it is a beautiful, quiet, and lovely place. And here we have a closer view on the sculpture. Here we have more rocks. Here we have a friend who is accompanying me, an American, who's back to her grandmother's roots from this island. And there, in the distance, is Diana. No, Anna, I don't remember, but it's a huge, huge head. And here is also a sculpture. It's a chair with a pocketbook on it. Strange, but interesting. And there we have this yellow, huge, big yellow, it looks like an anchor. Maybe it is. Here's a close-up of what looks like an anchor, but it's just a free-form sculpture. But very large, very tall, I would say 20 feet high. Anyway, in the distance, we can see what they call points, and we'll get closer to that eventually. And here again we see Diana up there on the hill, and let's follow Kristen. And here's another sculpture, and it's at its base is heather. And the heather plant is everywhere in this part of Sweden. It always grows on rocks, doesn't require very much water. And so you see this beautiful, beautiful raspberry color when they become mature. Beautiful color. And here we have more heather on the rocks. Heather and heather and heather everywhere. This beautiful pink raspberry color that just gives such a beautiful hue to the landscape. And as I said before, it grows on the rocks because it doesn't need a lot of water to survive. And it just fills in all those empty spaces between the rocks. And here we are approaching closer to the sculpture called Diana. It's Diana's head only, and it's got to be at least 100 feet high. And if you look very closely to the left of the sculpture, you will see a human being. It might look like it's a tree, but it's really a person up there. And you can see how small and minuscule that person is in relationship to the sculpture. And here is another vantage point near that sculpture, Diana, and Kristen is taking a photo of the water nearby. And remember, this is an island, so it's surrounded by water. And it's a beautiful photo. And you can see the enormous rock formations. So very often when Swedes go swimming, they're actually diving off these rocks which are smoothed over by centuries of water rippling over them. Again, here's another photo without Kristen in it. And you can see the striations on the rock formation in the foreground. So apparently, or maybe the water at one time was actually right there creating the striations. Who knows? And now we see clearly, as we get closer, a human being up there, and you can see how enormous this sculpture is, and the engineering that must have gone into the actual placement of this sculpture. Now we can see that it's a young gal Diana, and again you can see the heather, which is everywhere, which gives a beautiful hue to the scene. Again, here we have more people, and you can see how enormous this sculpture is and how impending it is. Here is Kristen, and she's standing at the back of the sculpture, back of the head, and you can see the water in the distance and the rugged terrain, rocks, rocks, and more rocks. And here's a closer one of Kristen. And Kristen's father's mother was born and raised on this island of TjoÜrn. I'm going to spell that. It's T-J-O umlaut R-N, pronounced TjoÜrn. And it is about 1 hour north of Gothenburg. And the sister island is called Orust, O-R-U-S-T, both beautiful islands. And that island, Orust, came my mother's parents from Sweden to Northeastern and bought a house on Jenny Lind Street. And we all know Jenny Lind was the Swedish Nightingale who toured America with P.T. Barnum, and it was the year 1869, I believe, toured America. And now we have a close-up, beautiful close-up of all the heather. Positioned is this interesting sculpture. It looks like it looks like bees which are surrounding this person. You can see the legs, the blue legs, and it's right there, embedded almost on the side of the rocks. Here's a closer look at this. So what could it be? We can see somewhat human legs with bumps all over them, and we can see the outline of a human being. What does this represent? Your guess is as good as mine. When our walk is almost over, and this is called the Points. Again, if you look very closely to the left of this sculpture, you'll see a tiny little person who's probably a 6-foot man standing there. And the color striations on this sculpture are what's interesting. And there's right at the inside the sculpture itself is a woman with a stroller, I believe, and a baby. So these are two sculptures which are enormous in their physical appearance, but also their impact on the viewer. Here we are getting a little closer. You can see this is a beautiful, the colors against the blue sky is very dramatic and interesting. And here we have Diana peeking at us from a distance. And that concludes our trip through the landscape of the sculpture park Pilane, and that's spelled Pilane, and that's located on the island of TjoÜrn on the west coast of Sweden. Every year, new sculptures are placed in the sculpture park, but I'm sure that Diana is going to probably remain. I can't imagine what it would take to remove her. And she is on the highest pinnacle of the sculpture park, overlooking and somewhat observing all of us. Hope you enjoyed this little visit to a sculpture park, and maybe someday you'll have the privilege and fun to visit.